Hey guys, so welcome back to yet another episode of Get Corporate Ready. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Bohlali Baile, and in this video, what we'll be speaking about is how do I prepare for that second interview, right? So you've been through the first interview, you nailed it. Maybe there were some things that were still learnings for you as you came out of that, but now you've been called for a second one, and people tend to ask me, how do I prepare differently for the second one? And what does the second one actually mean? So in this video, I'm going to be taking you through how to prepare and ace your second interview. So stick with me. If this is something that is going to be of value for you, then make sure that you're listening in all the way to the end. I tend to get a lot of people asking me, Bohlali, I've made it through my first interview. I'm now going for a second one. How do I prepare for the second interview? What's the difference, right? And as a young talent specialist, I love using this platform to be able to share tips and tricks around how you best prepare for your next interview. You want to nail it. You want to show up as your best self. You want to make sure that you're setting yourself up to get that step closer to getting that job offer. Now, the first thing I want to mention, never assume that you're hired, right? Never assume that, oh, the second interview is just going to be a walk in the park because the first one went so well and they loved me. So obviously this one, don't need to prepare too much. That's absolutely not the way that you go about your second interview. It's so important that you prepare for your second interview. Here are some steps that I think are important for you to always be mindful of. So as soon as they let you know that you've been shortlisted for that second round interview, it's important always to ask who you're going to be meeting for your second interview. And also, is there anything that I need to prepare, right? Sometimes what tends to happen is that when you do come for your first interview, you're generally meeting the HR people, you're meeting the recruiters, you're meeting some of the first line people within the company, right? And by the time they call you back for your second interview, it's so important for you to always be mindful of the fact that you've made it past the first interview for a reason, but as you go for a second interview, there's definitely going to be differences, right? You're not going to meet exactly the same people. You may meet people that are a lot more senior to the role, and some of those people will then include the hiring manager. Now, the hiring manager is not the same as a recruiter. A recruiter is someone that sits within the HR space, and what they tend to do is they're the ones that receive all the applications, they screen through them, and they do the first line interview. So it's almost the entry level that you go into. Once you've seen them, the hiring manager is actually the person who has said, I've got a need in my team, right? So it's typically going to be the person that you are then reporting into. And so the way in which you approach the second interview is so different from what you'd approach the first. And this is why it's important for you to always ask who you are going to meet and if there's anything for you to prepare. Once you know who you're going to meet, a tip from me is that it's important for you to go through and go to their LinkedIn page, read up a bit about them, see who they are, see where they've worked before, see what their level of experience actually is. This is going to help you really identify and get a sense of their level within the company. And also if it's a technical role or someone that's quite senior in a technical role, you might then get a cue as to the type of questions you may anticipate from that particular individual. And then that's going to help you as you are crafting some of your questions for the end of your second interview as well. Some companies, when they call you for second interviews, may expect you to prepare something, right? Whether it's a presentation that you need to prepare or something that you're going to be speaking through. Some companies ask for some of that. Also, another thing that could come up as part of the process is that they may ask you to do some psychometric assessments. So when you ask the question, what should I be preparing? These are some of the things that may come up as things that you need to prepare. But not all companies do that, some do. So always make sure to ask for that particular reason. The second tip that I think is so important is for you to review your first interview. Some of you will know that as you go for your first interview, you end up leaving there thinking, I should have answered that question differently. Or, once you've asked some of your questions at the end of the interview, you've learned so much more about the people, the culture, And so that's why it's important sometimes to ask questions about the role, about the culture, about the organization at the end of your first interview. Because some of the things that you gain from that and some of the information that you gain from it are things that are going to be important for you as you get invited for your second interview. So you always need to go back to your first interview, and go through it and say, what could I have done differently? What are some of the questions that I could have nailed a lot more that I felt like maybe I just rambled through it or spoke through it quite quickly? And as you go through that, make sure you're preparing yourself accordingly, right? So make sure that you know this time, if you get asked a question about this, this is how I'm going to answer it. If they asked you a question about the company and you felt like you didn't know enough information, get back to that and make sure you know enough information. So always review your first interview, go back to some of the questions you asked and what the answers were, because those are things that are supposed to then make you better in your second interview when you get invited for it. The third thing that I think is important, always familiarize yourself once again with the job spec, right? And the requirements of the role. It's important for you to freshen up on what you know and understand the role to be. And also, like I said in my previous point, once you understand the role a bit better based on the questions you asked about the role, make sure that you're incorporating this knowledge as you go into the next interview. The reason for this is that you don't want to go in there and be caught out in the second interview not knowing information about the role, right? You need to come across a lot better prepared for your second interview than you did for your first. And a lot of the information that you gain from your first interview are things that you're supposed to be using to really help set you apart and to show that you've incorporated all the things you learned in your first interview, you've incorporated some of that knowledge in your second. And because you're going to be meeting with people that are different, it's important for you to also ensure that you are presenting yourself as someone that's already been through a first round, that is even more eager about the role and more excited about it, and showing a level of better understanding of the job that you are interviewing for. Fourth key thing, always brush up on your knowledge of the company as well, right? So like I said in point 2, once you've brushed up on the knowledge that you've now gained from the first interview, important for you to just keep abreast of what is new and happening within the company, right? So whether you're reading the latest news, whether you are following the company on social media, always brush up on what's latest, what's been happening since the time that I did my first interview, right? So that if you are asked anything about the company, you seem relevant, you seem like you've researched, and you seem up to date with the latest news about the company. I think one thing that you must always be ready for in a second interview is that you will get asked questions a lot more about the actual role, right? And how you see yourself fitting into the role and the organization at large. So typically, if you are getting hired by a hiring manager, what hiring managers generally look for is this person going to be the right fit for my team? Is this person going to be the right fit for the environment and the organization? So it's always important that you have a better understanding of the role, and also you have a better understanding of why you fit into that role and why you would fit into the organization. Like I said, use your first interview to just brush up on some of that. Understanding once again, where are my strengths in relation to this role? Where are my development areas? And what else have I found out about the role off the back of my first interview that I can add in terms of where I think my strengths lie? So it's important for you to always focus a lot more on the job and the role and your understanding of it, right? So they may ask you also some technical questions. So if you're going for a finance role, they may ask you technical questions about using certain systems, the understanding of technical terms, or where that particular role fits into the organization and why it's important that companies have that kind of role. But they're also going to test whether you're the right personality fit for the company. As a hiring manager, it's always important that we have a sense of, we know the personalities we have in our team. We know the type of personality that's going to work within the team and work well within the team. So always be ready to present your best self from a personality and character perspective, but also understand the role a lot more than what you did in your first interview. So the next thing that I think is always important for you to do is to really stay true to yourself, right? Be honest, be authentic as you come across in your interview, because ultimately, as much as you may want the job, you also want to know that they want you, right? You also want to know that when they hire you or they give you that offer letter, they're giving an offer letter to a person who's presented themselves in the most authentic way. You don't want to sell yourself off as someone that you are not, or someone that's trying to become this thing that you think they expect of you. Because then when they do give you an offer, they're really giving an offer based on what you've sold and not who you are. So make sure that you are honest, you stay authentic, and that you are always yourself. You present your best self in an interview from a personality perspective, a character perspective, what your values are, how that aligns to the company. You need to be true to yourself because you want an organization that's going to want you for you. And last but not least, I think it's so important, guys, still prepare questions that you're going to ask. You're meeting different people this time around, and depending on who you're going to be meeting, because you will have done your research on LinkedIn about who they are, what they do, prepare some questions specific for them, specific for their role, right? To continue to show an interest in the role, to continue to show an interest in the organization. So always prepare questions for your second round of interviews, and make sure that those questions are not the basic questions you asked in your first round, right? Around, oh, tell me more about the culture, or tell me a little bit more about this or that aspect. Make sure that it's things that actually now matter to you. Now that you've been through your first interview, what are some of the things you've gone home and thought about in the interim? What are some of the things that have come up for you that are questions about the role, right? So when you're going to meet a hiring manager, ask them about themselves, right? Ask them about their journey, what it is they do, where the vision of the team is going, and ask more questions about the role, to say, after my first interview, this is some of the things that I thought about from a role perspective. I remember you said that the role is A, B, C, D. I'm so excited to be able to really be asking you as the hiring manager and the head of the team about this particular thing that I was wondering about the role, right? So show a level of interest. Make sure that you're still preparing some questions that you're going to ask. Don't end your second interview saying, no, I've got all my questions asked from the first interview, because you must always be cognizant that you're meeting different people. If you're meeting the same people, maybe then there aren't any questions that you have to ask. But if you're meeting a different set of people, it's important for you to be cognizant of that and make sure that you've prepared something to ask them. Guys, I really hope that that was helpful. I think it's so important for you to be as prepared, if not more, for your second interview, because you know that you're one step closer to getting that offer letter for this particular role. So make sure that you are doing all the tips that I've given you, and make sure that you presenting yourself as someone a lot more knowledgeable about the company and the role, and make sure that you always show a level of enthusiasm, right? Never assume that people already know about you. I've had some people that I've interviewed and maybe they've come through on a second interview, and as you ask them maybe a basic question about, oh, tell us a bit more about yourself, they kind of look a bit puzzled, like, oh, okay. So like I said the last time, never lead with like I said the last time, right? Because always remember, you're meeting different people. There may be similar people in the room as well that you've already met in the first one, but for the benefit of those that are new on the panel, make sure that you present yourself as if it's the first time that they've seen you, right? Don't go in there with, well, I've already said this, or give off an aura of, but I've already spoken through this. Why do I need to speak through it again, right? So always make sure and assume that people know nothing about you, even though they may have your CV. Never assume that people know stuff about you. Always go in there, and even if they ask you the same questions that they asked in the first interview, go in there with a level of enthusiasm and really present yourself in a way that says, I'm here, I'm ready to repeat everything I said in the first round without making it seem like I'm repeating myself, right? So go in there and make sure that you are putting your best foot forward and answering questions in a way that makes the new person feel like it's their first time meeting you, and gives them insight into who you are. And like I said in one of my first points, if you've gone through your first interview, you know what kind of questions they asked you, now's an opportunity to just nail it, right? You shouldn't be making the same mistakes you made in your first one. You need to be nailing it. You need to come off a lot more confident in your second interview, because you're familiar with the people, you're familiar with the environment, you're familiar with the role. So make sure that you are showing up when it comes to your second interview. Guys, that's the information I wanted to share with you. Comment below if there's anything that you feel like you still want to find out about, or anything that really creates a level of anxiety for you in your second interview. Hopefully I've covered some of that already within this video, and if not, I'll make sure to respond to you as much as possible. If you've enjoyed this interview, make sure that you're subscribing and giving me a thumbs up. Thank you so much once again for tuning in, and looking forward to engaging with you even further.